this webinar. Today, as a speaker, we have with us Dr. Andrew Morgenstern, and he will be talking on topic, How do I publish a peer-reviewed article? Before he begins, I would like to give his general introduction. Dr. Andrew is an OD Fellow of American Academy of Optometry and National Academy of Practice. He is also a diplomat at American Board of Optometry and a director of American Optometric Association evidence-based guidelines. Further, he is also a healthcare and management consultant at Vision Center of Excellence. I welcome you, Dr. Andrew, on behalf of Mero Eye Foundation and all our participants.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me and inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak so far away, but also so close to home because I get to do it over Zoom. So I'm going to put the slides up right now. Can you guys see the slides okay?
Yes, doctor.
Great. All right, and my volume sounds good to you guys?
Yeah.
Great. All right. So this presentation is called How Do I Publish a Peer-Reviewed Article? And I just want to give you a little bit of background on myself. I do have to go over some disclosures. The first is that I am the current director of the American Optometric Association Clinical Resources Group. And what we do is we actually develop with volunteer optometrists we develop evidence-based clinical practice guidelines. And as it relates to peer-reviewed journals, we have to review all the material out there. So we develop clinical practice guidelines, so guidelines that you can use in your practice, and they're publicly available on the American Optometric Association website, aoa.org, and you look for the clinical practice guidelines. I'm going to go through that a little bit, but they're available. And when we build them, we have to build them by reading peer-reviewed articles and grading peer-reviewed articles for the information. And that's where a bulk of my experience with this comes in addition to writing my own peer-reviewed articles. I'm also a contract optometric subject matter expert for the United States Department of Defense, Defense Health Agency, Vision Center of Excellence. And we do research in acute eye injury and also vision dysfunction associated with traumatic brain injury. And I do have to say, because I do work with the United States government, that this presentation is my opinion only, and it is not the opinion of the United States government or any affiliated agency, department, or contract organization. This is my personal opinion. Okay. From a disclosure perspective, just to give you a background on what my journal experience and editorial experience is, I'm currently now the Chief Medical Editor Emeritus. I was the Chief Medical Editor for quite a few years for two journals, Advanced Ocular Care and Collaborative Eye. I am the director of that content review board at the American Optometric Association. And I'm also on the content review board of the AOA's magazine called Focus. I've written and have done work with Cataract and Refractive Surgery Today. I'm on the editorial board of Optometry Times and have authored the TLC Laser Eye Center's Focus on Co-Management articles for a number of years now as well. So you guys invited me to speak, and I was told, I live in Washington, D.C., and my first thoughts, because I realized it was in Kathmandu, I realized the only experience that I had of it was from a Bob Seger song. And the big quote that goes over and over again in the song, the one that's going to Kathmandu, up in the mountains is where I'm going to. If I ever get out of here, that's what I'm going to do. And I am really excited to say that not only did I listen to Bob Seger, I'm now speaking Kathmandu right now. I understand that he spelled it wrong in the song, but we'll tell him about that. And as I did this, I actually started doing a lot of research on Nepal and realized how beautiful of a country that you folks have. And I'm sure this is the view that every one of you gets to see outside of your office every single day. I'm obviously joking about that. I'm sure it's slightly different than this. But one day, I really hope to come visit, because after all the research that I've done, it really is a wonderful country. So let's get into the most important stuff here. Why is peer review important? Well, this is a funny slide, a comical slide on, doctors knowing what they're doing. The reason why peer review is so important, and getting a peer-reviewed journal written is so important, is that it develops some of the best quality information that we have to work by. As doctors of optometry, and folks that work in the healthcare industry, we serve our patients, and our patients come to us trusting that we're going to give them the best advice and take care of them the best way possible. Well, once you leave school, the way to gain that information is by going to get educated yourself by speakers and also reading articles. And you hope those articles, and you sometimes blindly think those articles are actually all good information, but sometimes they may not be. So it's really important to understand what a peer-reviewed article is and why it's so important. So a peer review, what is peer review? Peer review is a process used to judge the quality of articles submitted for a publication in a scholarly journal. Peer-reviewed articles are said to be the most reliable sources of information that you can use. They must undergo a process of review and examination before they can be published. The author of the article must submit to the journal the journal editor, who forwards the article to experts in the field. Because the reviewers specialize in the same scholarly areas as the author, they are considered the author's peers. And so I just received, I'll tell you that I volunteer as an editor for a couple of journals to review peer-reviewed articles. Now, one of them I just recently read was spot on. Everything was great. The references were fantastic. They were current. The information was solid based on systematic reviews and meta-analyses. And then we accepted that paper. We made a few edits, and that's going to go to print. However, I received another article recently that was not at all. It was based on evidence that was of very low quality. It used very much outdated references. It didn't reference what we would consider to be consensus information on how to treat a certain disease state. And I actually rejected that paper and sent it back to be completely rewritten. And so the reviewers are really important to the peer review process. And what you need to know is when you're developing a peer reviewed journal article, you have to realize that you're writing it not only to the ultimate user, which is doctors around the world, but you're writing it knowing that a reviewer is going to dissect it and look for any errors in there possible. So the reviewer is an impartial person that's charged with carefully evaluating the quality of the submitted manuscript. The peer reviewers check the manuscript for accuracy and accept the validity of the research methodology and procedures. What is the research methodology? Well, did you do this in a smart fashion? Did you use enough subjects in the study? Did you do a retrospective process or a prospective process? If it's appropriate, the reviewer will suggest revisions. If that article is lacking scholarly validity and rigor, we reject it. And I've rejected articles before, and I'm sure I'll reject them in the future. When I wrote my first peer-reviewed article, it was flat out rejected. And I'm sad to say that I had to learn the hard way, which is a lot. If you're going to start and write a peer-reviewed article for yourself for the first time, I would very much suggest that you do it in a group of authors that have experience writing, because those people can help you along the way to get your initial journal submission accepted. It's okay if it needs edits, and it's okay if it needs changes, but you don't want it flat out rejected. And the best way to avoid that from happening is to write and submit initially with someone who's done this before. You'll find the journals, there's many journals out there, as we all know. It'll be sponsored by a professional scholarly society, professional association, or university appointment. So the first thing you're going to write when you do this is an abstract. And we have all seen abstracts before. One of the probably the best places, and I don't know your level of research that you're working with over there, but here in the United States, our collection of medical abstracts is largely housed in a website called PubMed, PubMed.org. And PubMed is a location that's sponsored by the National Institute of Health of the United States, where almost all medical journal articles are housed. And what you see when you go to type in keywords are words that reflect the majority of the article's discussion. And so when you type in the keywords, it'll pull up abstracts. And those abstracts are really, it's a summary of the beginning of the article. When you write your abstract, you want the tone of it to be thoughtful, restrained, and serious. And a total abstract is typically limited to 300 words or less. And when we're talking about abstracts, it's really important to understand what components you need for your abstract. So you may have realized this, or you may not have realized this, but different types of papers require different components to the abstract. Well, what does that mean? For example, if you were writing in a peer-reviewed journal and you were writing a clinical trial or a systematic review, your abstract would have 5 components to it. Component number 1 would be the significance of the article, 50 words or less. Then you would have a section called the purpose, the methods, the results, and then the conclusions. But if you were writing something like a case report, which is different, just to review, let's take a systematic review for a second. What is a systematic review? Because it's important to understand the different types of articles, especially when you're writing your methods. You have to be able to describe what methods that you used in the development of the journal article. And so a systematic review, for example, is, let's take a topic within eye care. Let's take the topic of keratoconus, right? And so keratoconus is a disease of the cornea. And in keratoconus, the cornea becomes weakened, the collagen within the cornea becomes weakened. And ultimately, a lot of these patients require contact lenses to have their vision suffice for their quality of vision, to improve their quality of life. Well, so let's say we did a search we wanted to write a paper on which type of contact lens is most effective in keratoconus patients. Well, what we would do is we would search a PubMed or some sort of literature database for papers that have already been written about contact lenses and keratoconus. And let's say we get 100 or 150 papers back from that search. Well, we go through those papers and we see that soft contact lenses may not be produced as the general consensus of all these papers was that scleral contact lenses provide generally better vision than soft contact lenses do for advanced keratoconus patient. If we wrote a paper on that based on the answers that came out of those 100 papers, that is a systematic review. It's a review of a topic and a certain question over casting a net over, looking at papers over a certain period of time. So if we wanted to write a peer-reviewed article, a systematic peer-reviewed article on keratoconus and contact lenses, we would have to include those 5 parts as part of our abstract. Well, let's say we wanted to produce a case report. What's a case report? Well, a case report is completely different than a systematic review. Whereas a systematic review looks at a large amount of papers and gets a consensus bit of information, a case report literally is a case report of one case, typically, or it could be multiple cases. But in generally speaking, a case report, you could have one patient that had keratoconus that you fit a scleral contact lens on, and that patient did very well. And then you can write up that individual case and put that into peer review. And that abstract for that type of paper would only require 4 parts. It would require the significance, the purpose, the information on the case report, and then the conclusion. So an abstract, ultimately, I know I've been very wordy about it, but an abstract, we all look up abstracts to try to get information about a paper. It's the shortened version that gives you a concise bit of information. Writing them properly is really important to the reader, especially if they're doing research on a particular topic, because it'll tell them what they're looking for. And so I spoke to you about before about something called keywords. Keywords are very important. If you've ever looked at a paper before and you look at the abstract within the paper, at the bottom of the abstract, many times you'll see something that says keywords with a colon, and then there'll be 5 or 6 words after that, maybe 3 of them. And keywords are, there are at least 3 to 5 keywords that are mentioned in the abstract that help us find the article or find the content of the article. Because when I'm writing a research paper, or where I'm trying to write a peer-reviewed article, and I have to look up research in a PubMed or some other open source system to gain information, I'm going to put in specific keywords. Those keywords that I'm putting in the search engine are going to correlate directly to the keywords that are in the paper, and that will automatically cue those papers to come up so I can see them. So the more accurate you are with your keywords, the more times your paper will have a hit when somebody is searching for that topic. So it's very important in the research world to have proper keywords. Also, and to me, really, this is the most important thing that you need to be aware of when you're writing an article. I would say that as somebody that reviews papers, be aware of your citations and what you're citing, and when you put them in your paper, the format in which you're writing your citations in there. An article has footnotes or endnotes or citations of other sources of information that you're writing about. You're going to go through, when you're writing a peer-reviewed journal article, you will go into these open source places like PubMed or whatever it is in your area of the world to look up information to gain access to abstracts and papers. The citations from those typically are in one of 2 styles, and that's really up to the journal. And I'll speak to that in a little bit in a second. But basically, there's 2 main styles that we cite journal articles in, and one of them is in the AMA style, the American Medical Association, or the American Psychiatric Association style. And they're a little bit different, but you have to remember to keep your citations consistent when you're writing your journal article. One of the things that for somebody like me who reads a lot of papers and journal articles, when I look and read the paper, I'm not just reading the paper and the information as a reviewer, but I'm also reading those citations. It's very important because if, let's say, you're writing a paper like keratoconus, or let's say even diabetes or diabetic retinopathy. Well, if you're writing a paper on diabetes or diabetic retinopathy as it relates to the eye, and you do not include a citation from the EDTRS, the early treatment for diabetic retinopathy study, even though it was from the 1980s and 1990s, that is a landmark study that was written up that gave us a tremendous amount of information on diabetic retinopathy. Well, I want to see those sources in my paper that I'm reading and I'm grading. You want the high quality citations to be located in your paper, because when you have the right citations, when you use the right information to build your peer-reviewed article, it lends a lot more validation to that article in terms of the quality of the evidence that you're presenting. Case reports, I'll give you an example. Case reports are typically information about one case, one patient. Well, when we look at research, we typically don't want to see papers on just a case report, on just one bit of information, because it doesn't tell us high quality information on a disease state or a treatment methodology. We like to see a larger subject size than 1 or 2 or 10 or 15. And so when we get into systematic reviews, the quality of the evidence goes dramatically up, because those are looking at papers, and each one of those papers may have 100, 200, 500 subjects in there. Also, you want your citations, the stuff that you're going to cite in your peer-reviewed journal article, you want it to be current. I would say, generally speaking, a good rule of thumb is that whatever paper you're writing, 75% of the articles that you're citing, it's preferable for them to be written within the last 5 years. That's just my kind of what I think to myself. Why is that? Well, if I'm writing a paper on, let's say, glaucoma treatment, and with glaucoma treatment, the medicines change all the time, and we get new medications, we get new devices, we get new methods in tracking the disease. And if you're citing papers from 15, 20 years ago in your peer-reviewed article, that information is not up to date, and it's not going to be consistent with what's going on in current medicine today, in current optometry. Same thing if you think about it with contact lenses. If you're writing a paper on contact lenses and you're citing information on the AccuView 1 or the AccuView 2 contacts, unless it's of a historical nature, that information's outdated. And there have been many, many iterations and improvements in contact lenses over time. You want that information to come through. So again, citations, I'll go back. Citations are very important to me. I put a lot of weight into it when I'm reading and grading an article, and it should be a significant consideration when you're writing your own peer-reviewed journal article. Ultimately, you're going to want to, if you're doing this for the first time, you're going to need to select a journal that you want to submit it to. And so I have this bullet point here. Selecting the right journal is critical for getting your manuscript accepted and published. Just because you submit a peer-reviewed article, to a journal does not mean that they're going to publish it. There's a process, a significant process that you need to go through to get this stuff done. Often papers are rejected because the research topic is outside the scope of the journal or inappropriate for its target audience. You want to make sure that you are writing to the right journal for the right topic. So how do you select a journal? Well, you want to look at the scope of the journal. Does it match your study? You want to look at your specifications. Do I want to submit to a certain type of journal only? You want the impact factor. This indicates how often the articles from a journal are going to be cited. You want something that's going to have a good impact. And also, you want to look at that target readership. Who's going to be reading the journal? Is that in line with the topic that you're writing about? What type of manuscripts do they look for? Do they look for original research or review? And then also, you want to know about the visibility of the journal in the related literature. Is this going to be visible? Are you writing it for the right reason so the information gets out there? And so in selecting a journal, I wanted to use here's a screenshot of the journal titled Optometry and Vision Science, and I'm sure many of you have seen this before. I'm going to leave this page up for a second here because there's a lot of great information. This page, any journal that you go to submit, there will be a place where you can actually read all of the information for authors that are going to submit an article. And there is, as it relates to optometry and vision science, the specific journal, there's way more information on this page than I can post in this presentation. So I wanted to bring up the first page where this is the information for authors page. And so you can see the first line over here, and it's a step-by-step process that it'll take you through. Not only does it tell you how to submit it, but it tells you what you need to do to write your article the right way. And it gets to very, very fine detail. Optometry and Vision Science accepts manuscript submissions through a submission service on another website. And you can obviously click that link. Optometry and Vision Science, as many other journals do, have specific instructions and guidelines for submitting articles. Those instructions and guidelines are readily available on the submission service site. Please review them carefully. There's a reason why they bold that. Please read and review them carefully. And the reason why that is if you don't read and review it carefully and do what they say, articles that are not submitted in accordance with our instructions are more likely to be rejected. And like I said before, you don't want your article rejected. And here you can see clicking on the submission service links on this page will open our manuscript submission service website in a new browser. And as you can see, authors interested in increasing awareness of their research through video slides, infographics, they have resources that you can use. And so if you look on top over here, you can see I'm logged in as myself. Hopefully you can see my cursor. There's collection subjects for authors and journal info, and you would do these drop-down screens over here to gain access to all of this. But truth be told, it's not just this journal. You can submit to any journal you want. All journals these days will typically have the information for the authors, so you can know ahead of time what you need to do in your article to get this completed and submitted the right way. And so what I'll show you here, you can find it on the website. The Optometry and Vision Science actually has a very big handbook. And it's the website, if you want to take a screenshot of it, you can see the website on the bottom. I put it over here. I added it to this. But this is the title of the PDF, Optometry and Vision Science Instructions for Authors, written by Mike Twa, who is the editor-in-chief of this, and many other people. And it's been, edited over time to suit what the journal is now. You can learn and read exactly all the instructions that you need, because if we went through them, we would be going through for days on this site. So what I did was I went through some of the information here and broke it down for you just to explain to you what you need to be looking for to write a successful peer-reviewed journal article if you wanted to submit it to Optometry and Vision Science, which is one of our main journals here in the States. And so they're typically looking for original investigations. So they don't want it to be published someplace else and then republished in their journal. They want original investigations. They're looking for clinical trials, case reports, case series. So a report is an individual, series is a group of people with the same condition, or reviews. And of the reviews, typically they're preferred to be evidence-based. And the two that are most evidence-based are systematic reviews and meta-analyses. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, or technical reports. So these are the different article types that they typically want to see submitted to their journal. The document layout, this is how specific they get. And I just wanted to put this up here. I don't necessarily want to read every line in this, but just so you're aware of how precise you have to be. When you submit it, it has to be a Microsoft Word document. PDF documents are acceptable for initial review, but Word documents are required for production if accepted. They have to be 8.5 by 11-inch page sizes with 1-inch top, bottom, and side margins. They typically have to be typed in 11-point sans serif font. And a sans serif font, the specific fonts that they're looking for are Arial, Helvetica, Calibri, or Verdana. But typically, most commonly, they like to see Arial or Helvetica. double spaced. They want to see manuscript text file for numbering should stop at the reference lines. Response to reviews have to be done in colored texts. Submitted revisions should include a response review and a single copy of revised manuscript. They're looking for specifically changes be made in red or blue in color. And so my point being here is that, this is not a process that you get done in a day. This is an important process, but it has to be done in a specific manner for submission. And so, well, how does this relate? So we talked about those types of papers, but they also speak to, case reports and presentations and disease states. But what about drugs and therapeutic agents when you're writing these peer-reviewed articles as it relates to optometry and vision science? This is how specific they want to get. They want to get to, they want to refer to drugs and therapeutic agents by their accepted or generic or chemical names and not abbreviated. You have to use code numbers only when a generic name is not yet available. Copyright or trade names of drugs should be capitalized and placed in parentheses after the name of the drug only the first time the drug is mentioned in the text, and the names and the locations of the manufacturers, drug suppliers, and equipment cited in the manuscript are required to comply with the trademark law and should be provided in parentheses. And the reason why that's important is because the drug names really have to be understood by all throughout the globe as we're writing to this stuff, not just here in the United States. In terms of the accuracy and the detail of visual acuity, when you're writing to visual acuity in this journal, because visual acuity is different throughout the world, visual acuity has to be represented as they were measured in Snellen acuity, fraction, logMAR, etc. While reporting Snellen acuities can help readers interpret results, such as conversions, they should only be used to supplement the primary data reported in the original measured format. So instead of, my point being here is when you're writing this peer-reviewed article, you can't just throw a visual acuity there. You have to think about what you're putting in there. Other important considerations when you're writing a peer-reviewed journal article is the precision and significant digits. So if we're writing an axis of a prescription, so let's say the patient has a spherical component of -1 and their cylinder is -2 and the axis of it is at 63 degrees. When we write it, they want it always written to 3 digits, so it would be 063, so there's no confusion on that scale. They want consideration tests of statistical significance, confidence intervals. Remember that all of your figures and graphical standards have to be interpreted by people around the globe. The file formats and the resolution have to be paid attention to. The figure legends, like we said, the font, the axes, and the keys. And again, most importantly, in my opinion, the copyright and the references have to be paid attention to. And then, of course, you're going to be writing this journal article yourself. So it's important to cite the authors, their affiliations, and their contributions correctly. So the authors should provide no more than 3 academic degrees, including their FAAO if you're a fellow of the Academy, and this is the Academy's journal. If more than 3 degrees are provided, the list will be truncated to the first 3 degrees. The author's affiliation should list the department, the school, and the institution. If there are multiple departments, you want to list them obviously differently. And so that's, in a nutshell, how we generally speaking, put this information in, and that's the complexity of a peer-reviewed article. And submitting it is really a step-by-step process. I think you remember in the beginning, one of the things that I said was that this is a process, and the process has to be adhered to for any journal so you don't get it rejected. Yeah, I think that's important. So what I want to do is, now that we have a kind of a firm understanding of, understanding what type of paper you want to write, who do you want to read it, what journal you want to submit it to, what rules that we have to follow to get it submitted and not get rejected. The question is that what's the output of all these journal articles? How do they affect optometry? How do they affect my clinical practice? What's the benefit of them? Host, we have about 15 more minutes left. Is that right, to get to the 45 minutes?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, great. That's perfect. I just wanted to make sure my timing was okay. So one of the things that I do, one of the things that I work with, I'm the director of the Clinical Resources Group at the American Optometric Association. And like I said in the beginning, we have evidence-based clinical practice guidelines that are free to the public, and you can get them at aoa.org, and you look under the clinical practice guidelines. And I just want to go through how rigorous of a process it is to develop these guidelines. A clinical practice guideline, because that's what we do, we see patients. So having a guidebook on how to take care and manage a certain disease state or perform a certain type of eye exam on an adult versus a child. All of that's really important, and there's a lot of information out there. And so what we do is we take all that information and we develop these clinical practice guidelines. And I want to talk to you about them because they're all peer-reviewed articles that we're researching. So once you develop your peer-reviewed journal article, once you get it in, once you get it submitted, and once you get it published, people are going to use it. That's the benefit to this whole thing. Peer review is a process, but at the end of the day, once you have a peer-reviewed journal article, you're not writing this so you can read it yourself. You're writing this so other people can read it and use it in clinical practice to help them be better doctors. So what are these clinical practice guidelines that we get out of peer review? They're public documents. They're professional liaison documents. They're part of the optometric education curriculum. They're supporting documents, so they support scope and expansion of what we can do as optometrists. And they give trustworthy recommendations, and hopefully they're up to date, hopefully they're unbiased, and hopefully they're comprehensive. Well, in the United States, we want to make sure that this is the case, and in medicine that we're producing high quality evidence-based clinical practice guidelines. But about 10 years ago, we really didn't have a process for this. And so when we write a clinical practice guideline, the traditional approach is that it's a consensus-based publication. We generally have a whole committee that reviews all the evidence and all the data, but we ultimately have one or two people specifically just writing the paper. When we do a consensus-based publication, we need to search the literature, and those are all those peer-reviewed articles for single papers. We reference as needed. The whole committee reads the first draft and approves changes by the final draft. And ultimately, the guideline that we complete is posted to something called the National Guideline Clearinghouse, or now ECRI in the United States. So way back about 10 years ago, there was a problem because we knew that clinical practice guidelines needed to offer guidance that's up to date, that's high quality, that talk about the pros and cons and the benefits and harms and risks of treatment. We wanted people to write these guidelines that didn't have conflicts of interest. You don't want the person writing the guideline on glaucoma to be paid by to be an employee of one company that makes a specific drug for glaucoma. So there has to be no conflicts of interest. Rigorous evaluations have to be completed, and it has to be searchable, available, and usable. And so there was a call to change the process. And so in 2008 here in the United States Congress, through the Medicare Improvements for Patients and Providers Act of 2008, asked the Institute of Medicine to determine the best methods on how to develop a clinical practice guideline. Well, it took them 3 to 4 years to develop a process, how to determine and how to write a clinical practice guideline. That report was released in 2011, 2012, and they developed 2 books through the United States Institute of Medicine of the National Academies of Science. And so one of them was called Clinical Practice Guidelines That We Can Trust, and these books are available. They have 8 standards by which guidelines can be written, and then also finding what works in healthcare, and there's 21 standards written out in that, and there's standards for systematic reviews, because remember, those systematic reviews that we talked about before were how we look at many studies on individual peer-reviewed articles, and that's how we get this high-quality information. Ultimately, in the United States now, when it's all done, and you can actually go in and log in for free to the ECRI Institute, I think it's ecri.org or .com, and this is where all of these clinical practice guidelines are housed once they're written. And you can see I logged in over here. This is me. I logged in not too long ago, and this is a snapshot from an older time I went in there. This is my home page. I can see all my saved items and contents here, and I can do a search for any type of paper in medicine. And this is free and available. So I did a search for optometric, and you can see that we have 3 of our optometric clinical practice guidelines listed here that you can go to. Evidence-based clinical practice guideline for patient with diabetes, for the adult eye exam, for the pediatric eye exam. And so we have 3 of them listed here, and they're all grounded in truth, and they're the most reliable sources of clinical practice guidelines out there. So how do we do it at the American Optometric Association? How do we build a clinical practice guideline? Well, we want an evidence-based approach to it. We want solid clinical recommendations, optimized patient care. We want to include as many of these systematic reviews as possible, and we want continuous quality improvement. And so this has been collaborative with schools of optometry and the academy and the National Guideline Clearinghouse, which houses all of this information, had a new inclusion criteria since 2014. So this is really the kind of meat and potatoes of how we have adopted from what their guidelines were. So the books that the government created, those 2 textbooks, the Institute of Medicine Standards, had an 8-step process in developing clinical practice guidelines from peer-reviewed journal articles. Number 1, we have to establish transparency of the group and manage. Number 2, manage the conflicts of interest. We want a group development, a guideline development group composition. We have to house them together. We have and get our writers as well. We have to establish a process for the ranking of evidence and clinical recommendation. So basically what we do is, let's say we take a topic like, we did diabetes. We did diabetes, and we ask ourselves, we sit down as a group, once we have our group that has no conflicts of interest, what questions do we want this guideline to answer? And then we send that out to researchers to find all of these papers. Well, when we got back our papers from diabetes on the questions that we wanted to answer on how to manage these patients, we got back about 1,400 papers that we had to read. And so we had to read them and grade them based on the strength of their quality of their evidence. And that's what we're looking to you guys to do. We want a high quality paper from you when you're writing these peer reviewed papers. So when we write clinical practice guidelines on how doctors should be taking care of their patients, we have the best information. Once they're graded on an A, B, C, or D scale, then we meet as a group and we talk about each individual paper. And do we agree with the grade? And really, what is the clinical recommendation that comes out of this paper? Once we have all of those clinical recommendations from all of those papers, we give it to the writer. The writer writes up the paper, and then we review it a bunch of times. And then we end up with a clinical practice guideline based on the best information. It's a very labor-intensive process. It takes about 2 years to develop a clinical practice guideline properly. And like I said before, you don't want to include references that are old, because that means you won't be giving the best information to your readers. Well, it's the same thing with these clinical practice guidelines that actually guide our doctors on how to practice the right way. We have to establish a 3 to 5 year update. So 3 years after we publish a guideline, we have to start doing the revision on it. So by the 5-year mark, we have a new paper to publish. And so that every topic that we do does this. So every 5 years, we have a new paper on the same topic. Obviously, like I said before, we want to establish transparency, manage conflicts of interest. Here is an example of clinical recommendation documentation and conflict of interest management, and also grading evidence. This is one of the charts that we use for all the different readers and graders. We have a guideline development group composition. So when we put together a clinical practice guideline, we don't want just optometrists. We want multidisciplinary people. We want internal medicine doctors. We want ophthalmologists as well, because your eye and the disease that your eye has doesn't care if you're seeing an optometrist or an ophthalmologist. It just knows it has a problem. And so we need input from the whole multidisciplinary team to write the clinical practice guideline correctly. And as we're reading it, we also want to have people in there that are methodologists, that understand the process very well, and also patients and stakeholders. And our groups are usually made up of 10 to 20 members. Ideal is about 14 people to write one guideline. We grade the strength and evidence of the clinical recommendation. And you can see here, when we articulate our papers, last night I had an articulation meeting. We have meetings that go over the quality of the paper so we can agree or disagree on the grades of the papers and get the clinical recommendations out of them. And then we review the final paper. Once it's written, we send it out for public review. So anybody in the public can actually comment on any information that we have in there. So even if we had people that were not part of our guideline development group, they can comment on it. We address those comments and see if we have to incorporate them or not. Ultimately, our guideline is read and voted on by our board. And once it's approved and sent up, we have to redo it every 3 to 5 years. And so the AOA built a 14-step process based off of the 8 steps. And so for every guideline that the AOA develops, we go through this 14-step process over here every 3 to 5 years to develop a guideline. And ultimately, and this is my last slide over here, we end up with a guideline. And so here's our most recent one, called The Eye Care of the Patient with Diabetes Mellitus, the 2nd edition. First edition was written 5 or 6 years ago. This is our 2nd edition that just recently came out this past November. And like I said, these guidelines, they're probably about 100 pages long. They have examined all of the best peer-reviewed evidence that's out there and collaborated it into one evidence-based clinical practice guideline. And so, why is that important? Well, our guidebook, our clinical practice guidebook, is based on peer-reviewed evidence. All of the peer-reviewed evidence that we include in here comes from people like you that are wanting to write these peer-reviewed papers. And so what I would tell you is that if you're truly interested in it, take the time to understand the process. Go to the right journal that's going to publish your article and learn their process first. Find a mentor out there, that's somebody who's done this before, that can help you write a paper, because it's much easier if you're doing it than doing it on your own the first time. And write, because the best way that we learn as doctors is from our peers, as you know, and using that highest quality evidence that's cited the right way is the best way to get that information out. And believe me, it's necessary, and it's real information that guides the way we take care of our patients around the globe. So that is what I have on a peer-reviewed article. So do you guys have any questions at all?
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Andrew, for such a wonderful session. Well, now it's time for the discussion session to begin. Shall I read the questions for you, Doctor?
Sure. Is there a way that I could read them as well on the screen, or?
Yeah, you can kindly check the chat box.
Chat box. Let's see here. Ooh. Let's see, chat box. Aha. And this is from Dr. Paudel. Really great info. Thank you so much. I was wondering what your thoughts are in relation to predatory journals and how to identify if a journal is non-predatory. And then the follow-up question is, what's the most common mistakes that writers do when they send to publish their articles? I'll answer the second part first. The most common mistake that writers make is that they don't follow directions. And I hate to say it's something as simple as that. To tell you about, predatory journals and people that are trying to rip you off and take your information, I would say that a high quality journal will always spell out for you exactly what they're looking for. If the journal does not provide a lot of information on how they want their articles written, I would definitely question that. The second thing I would do, you can't, if you suspect that there is a predatory journal, they're not going to tell you that they're a predatory journal. What I would do is go to the journal and look for individual articles, people that have not written for them on a regular basis, and contact those authors and ask them what their experience was with the journal. And if there's any questions or concerns they have. I would do it more than one person. I would actually probably do it for, if you suspect that you don't have a good journal on your hands that you're going to publish with, I would ask a bunch of the authors what their experience was. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. Are there any other questions?
Okay, doctor, I guess this is the question so far. So we'll be waiting a few minutes for the question. Let's see if anyone wants to ask any question. So I'd like to request all the attendees, kindly drop your question. Dr. Andrew will be happy to give you an answer. Okay, doctor, can we wait for a few minutes? Am I audible to you, doctor?
Do you want me to stand by for a few minutes, did you say?
Yes, doctor.
Absolutely.
Okay, I guess this is the question thus far. So I would like to close the discussion session here. Doctor, would you like to share some words regarding our program before ending the session? Any good notes?
Yeah, number one, look, the most important thing here is, I think if you're a clinician, I think if you're seeing patients, the most important thing to do is read. If you don't understand something, get out there, pick up a journal article and read about it, and you'll learn a lot of things. I do want to say, not in relation to this topic, but it's very important. We're going through a really challenging time in the world right now, and optometrists play a critical role, in my opinion, in that. Make sure, I don't know what your government is saying over in Nepal, but here in the United States, the general consensus of the scientists is that wearing masks is critically important, that the eyes may actually be a route or a conduit for the virus. So when you're seeing patients, it's advisable to wear protective eyewear, and do your best out there, because we obviously have a tremendous public health problem on our hands, and optometrists see tons of patients, and we're on the front lines of this stuff. It doesn't matter what your scope of practice is in your country, you're still seeing patients. And I wish you well, and I wish you a safe and healthy practice with your patients, and to keep taking care of them. Vision is arguably the most important sense that we have out there, and we make differences and we change lives, and we want to practice the best quality medicine that we can. The best way to do that is to read high quality journal articles. I know you're not American doctors. I know that you're far away from the United States, but please visit the American Optometric Association website, AOA.org. There are quite a few free resources out there, including our clinical practice guidelines. If you need help, if you have questions afterwards, by all means, reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat box over here. I don't know if everybody can see it.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Oh, no problem. If you have a question or a concern, just shoot me an email. I really hope one day to come visit you guys in person. I really want to see that part of the world. I wish you well, and I wish you health. And thank you so much for having me on this call. It's been an honor to speak to my colleagues on the other side of the globe. Over.
Okay, thank you so much, Doctor. I guess we lost our connection. So herewith, I announce the close of the today webinar, hoping to see you all again tomorrow. Stay safe, stay connected, and thank you so much.